good. That's good. Start off with a sexy post. It's kind of.
Hey y'all, if you're out there, say hello. Live with the KHive, episode 12. We've been doing this for 3 whole months, y'all. That's some dedication. Hey Carol.
Woo! Hold on
Just,
1 second, y'all.
hey Delante. Just gonna say hi to a couple people and then we're gonna get the show started. Ooh. Hey Portia. My friend Portia is on YouTube. Selena to the hill. I haven't
What's
seen
going
anybody.
on, y'all?
Hey EB, I haven't seen anybody check in for Facebook today, but I'm sure somebody will come up. Derek says, "What up, KHive? Hey Marvel Duchess."
Wow.
Hey, y'all. What's good? It's your girl. Oh, you know what? My Twitter is changed because some folks have crazy fans that they love, and I don't do craziness. So yeah, y'all want to
What
know
is it
how?
now? Is it this,
It's just
Sydney?
it's just underscore instead of the city at the city. It's just at the underscore like at underscore the city. So that's pretty much it. That's the only difference.
Okay, just updated it like that.
Yes, that's correct. Thank you.
Uh-huh. Hey Privy, I was told to Kara, Janelle, Emerald, Mark. Okay, we got a nice crowd going on. So y'all talk amongst yourselves. We're gonna get the show started.
We are.
And we got several things to cover tonight. So go ahead, Drew. Let's go. Let's do this.
I already know what time it is. You know what time it is. Y'all know what time it is. Yo, it's live with the KHive. We back. No, we stay live. Whether it's not in the daytime, we're gonna take a new rounds. But anyway, anyhow, it's for Drew comments here with the rest of the KHive panel. So go ahead and reintroduce us. For those of you who may not be acquainted, I know we got familiar faces, but for those of you who are unfamiliar, my name is Drew. Last name comments. I have a nice red solo cup of lemonade and vodka. Simple, I get too fancy. You know what I'm saying? Also, just wanted to go, it's the July 4th, but my folk were not free this particular holiday. So I'm wearing black in the celebration struggle and camouflage because we live it in to the actual ground. Anyway, anyhow, let's go around the panel and get the faces and names and started. Sydney, what's back?
What up, world? It's your girl CDA, and I am back again. I cannot believe that we have hit 12 episodes, y'all. This is just phenomenal. I was just talking about it today. But yeah, today I am also drinking something, a little simple. We just got a little peach drink in here with some Grey Goose. So I'm back loose with the goose, and y'all know, I got my complimentary because it's legal where I'm at. But yeah, let's get this show cracking. I'm excited.
Word life. Yo, Maya, how you doing?
I'm good. I'm drinking chai tea because I may or may not have had 2 gin and tonics before we started this. So time to have some caffeine. So I think,
There you go.
There you
go, sis. I love it.
Fantastic. And Reese, Black Reviews, what it do?
Cheers, y'all. I have an old fashioned once again. This is my first drink of the night, but yeah, it's 4th of July weekend, so I plan on turning the F up, okay?
Okay.
Reese, I really got to ask you a question before we get started. You make those yourself? Is it pretty good? Is it, you make your own?
My husband is the bartender, and he is spectacular at every cocktail. My preferred cocktail is a martini, which he makes amazing martinis, and these old fashions. But I don't do a lot of mixed drinks. I'm more of like straight up kind of girl. So old fashioned for the show, and then Jim Beam straight up for the rest of the night.
Jim Beam straight up now. Tell me.
And we have a lot of people who are pouring up in the comments too. We got some bourbon drinkers. We got some red cup drinkers. So yeah, I think everybody is ready for this holiday weekend. We know that, Juneteenth is our day, but that don't mean we're not going to celebrate a day off from work, jail. So let's go ahead.
Okay.
Get it popping.
Get it popping for real. So while we get it popping, I just want to talk about who else is getting popping. That's our girl, the wonderful, the immaculate, the spectacular, the always absolutely all-spectacular. That's a brand new word. You got to make it up because the words in English do not fully encompass her. Let me stop. We're talking about Kamala Harris, y'all. And her momentum, her energy, her power is going fantastically. Reese, can you tell us about just a little bit about her rise and her this wonderful wave she's on right now?
Well, Maya was going to get us started off on. Yeah, where the agenda at? We got to stick with the agenda. But before Maya goes on, we do have to shout out Kenny and Heather. They could not make it this week, but they are still live with the KHive. But we missed them. They might be able to hop into the comments, but they're not gone and they're not forgotten. Just not here this week.
That's right. Absolutely, y'all keep them. They with us right now in spirit. Maya, you know what? I think actually is a better choice to kick it to you right now, especially when it comes to Kamala Harris. One of the things that we know about Kamala is that domestically, she's given all the props and all the credit for all the wonderful accomplishments. What is not mentioned is her foreign policy. Mm-hmm. I don't think she gets the credit for that.
That's true. I'm gonna start on one path and then move a little over here because it's 4th of July weekend. First, I want to say that Kenny, when you listen to this, I was going to make some sweet tea in honor for you not being here. I didn't have time to make it. Okay, let's say that. Secondly, wow, it has been a very bizarre 7 days. First, let me say I caught Kamala Harris. She was on Nicole Wallace's show, Deadline, at the beginning of the week, and she was talking about the bounty story. I'm sure a lot of you have heard this, that Russia was paying Afghan soldiers perhaps to put bounties on U.S. soldiers' heads to murder them. And this is such a strange story to appear. First, let me just say that the reason why a lot of us have heard of it is it's been suggested that the story was leaked to the New York Times because there's been such retribution against whistleblowers. They didn't feel that they could go through the ranks like Colonel Whitman, who's also having some retribution against him. They're not letting him be promoted to colonel right now. It's a very strange time. So first, let me say, yes, it is the 4th of July weekend. And I think this is why this story has such resonance, right? This is supposed to be our independence from Britain, our divorce from King George. And now we've gotten to a place where we have a president who is basically okay with the idea that bounties are put on the military's head. I also want to say, before I get to Kamala, what some of her solutions are, is I want people to underscore how awful Trump has been for the military, for the VA in particular. He has used the Veterans Association, the VA, as a piñata. He's been whacking this piñata. The VA has already had a lot of problems. Mostly that a lot of their software is outdated. It's very difficult for them to get their healthcare needs put together. It's been very hard for them to get help medically if they need to. It's long been kind of a bureaucratic mess. Well, Kamala Harris came in and she had all these different fixes. The reason why I want to mention Trump still and Kamala Harris's solutions, because I just want to show you just how the polar opposite of what was happening. Trump has tried to privatize the VA, which means a lot of the veterans aren't able to go to doctors that are less money. He has been trying to get his buddies and Jared Kushner's buddy to develop software equipment. So they were supposed to streamline the VA, and all it's ended up is $5 billion has gone out of the VA into Jared Kushner instead of Trump's hands. I want people to really understand just the massive corruption of what was happening right now. What Kamala Harris wanted to do was the complete opposite. You know that Trump also introduced the trans-military ban. Kamala Harris, when she was running for POTUS, and why she would be an excellent VP, is that she wanted to rescind the trans-military ban. She wanted to make it safe for those in the DACA program to serve in the military program and get the full benefits. She also addresses sexual assault, which is a massive problem and kind of an unspoken problem that happens a lot in the military. And she wanted to make sure that they were going to get not only health care, but that the people that were causing the assaults would get investigated properly. She also recognized that a lot of soldiers were suffering from PTSD. And it was one of the reasons why some of them were being dismissed out of the military. They were having mental health crisis. And she wanted to address that as a reason to not kick them out, but instead get them treatment. So I just want people to see right now just how completely polar opposite of what we're dealing with right now. We have the opportunity in less than 120 something days to elect Joe Biden, and hopefully it will be Kamala Harris on the ticket as well. And that there'll be a real opportunity to bring attention to what is happening. I know a lot of people can't, and I will end with this. I know a lot of people are having a hard time grasping this idea. Kamala Harris grasping this idea that Trump has just injured the military. I don't know if any of you on the panel have family in the military. My great-grandfather served in World War I. My grandfather served in World War II. They're buried in Arlington Cemetery in Washington, D.C. I viscerally felt it when they said that they were putting bounties on heads. The military has an extraordinarily high Black and Latino population within the military. It helps pay for college. It helps get health care. It's a way of supporting families. So I understand that we're all outraged, exhausted right now. And it's not, this is not something you necessarily need to be outraged about, but it's something that you should really care about. They are a massive part. There are 1.3 million people served in our military. That's a massive amount of population right now. So I wanted to bring attention to that. Kamala Harris actually did go overseas, and she was greeted as if she was the president when she went over there on that foreign policy trip. So I think people are ready to have a real commander-in-chief again, and ready to have a commander-in-chief co-pilot who actually sees the military and recognizes that they're an integral part of our society. So that's all for me on that. Feel free to chime in.
Fantastic. I come from a military family. Dad's an ex-Marine. Uncle's in the Air Force. Aunt was a retired lieutenant colonel in the United States Army. Another uncle is retired master sergeant. So be all over the place. But yeah, I feel that.
And thank them for their service as well.
Oh, absolutely. I definitely will relay that. I was in JROTC, but I don't think nobody cared about that. Anyway, we're gonna go ahead and move on. As it relates to foreign policy, Sydney, as it relates to foreign policy in regards to the presidential envoy member, can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So when it comes to foreign policy and just, Kamala in general, we can see where she's leading as of today. We talk a lot about, plans and, people's thoughts in the future, what a future administration would look like with other candidates, whereas Kamala Harris is leading directly today on things that are important. I mean, obviously, because she is still a sitting senator, she does have to take leadership in some of these cases, but she has a unique lens and a unique outlook on what's actually currently happening right now, and she's very in tune with what's happening on the ground as it pertains to the future of the United States. In the future of a world where pandemics happen, and they are happening on U.S. soil in ways that we haven't seen in the past. Kamala is talking about already what that future looks like, and in particular with the introduction of the bill that has been coined, the bill to better prepare for and respond to pandemics. So on last week, Senator Harris introduced the Improving Pandemic Preparedness and Response Through Diplomacy Act legislation. And basically, it creates a special presidential envoy for pandemic preparedness and response. And I'm quoting this directly from her website. So the Preparedness and Response Act is charged, basically the president will be charged with developing and implementing a diplomatic strategy to prepare for, detect and respond to and recover from pandemics and other global outbreaks and infectious diseases. And this legislation was also introduced as an amendment to the fiscal year 2021 National Defense Authorization Act, NDAA, and this is coming directly from her website. So my apologies there for that being a little bit long-winded, but It's important to discuss exactly how she's viewing the future and what and introducing legislation that gives power back to a president that is looking to, not just be a figurehead, but someone who is looking to be a leader. And we see that she's already building the pathway for future, she's building a pathway through legislation for future administrations that will be very easy for them to take advantage of should something like, a brand new novel coronavirus, pop up in the future. We can see that Kamala Harris is already taking the steps to make sure that we're prepared for that moving forward. And I think that's very important for someone who is looking for the future of politics. I think anyone that wants to be involved with American politics, and what makes Kamala so unique is that she understands that the United States has to be a global player, and our defense and our defense mechanisms can't just be about fighting wars. They have to be about enhancing global relations for the United States. That's why our military was so had the reputation that it has had for such a long time. It's more than just fighting a war. It's more than just boots on the ground. It's more than just dropping drones. The United States military serves as purveyors to democracy. They serve as active assistance with struggling economies and struggling countries. So like I said, I think Kamala is looking to steer us back into that conference, into that light moving forward, and that's really important for what we're dealing with right now, especially as it pertains to our standing on the global stage.
So I want to make a mention of something real quick. I know Reese, I'm going to have you jump in just a second. I just want to make one mention of something real quick. Actually, Reese, so you mind? Oh, no, go ahead. Pop in there.
No, go ahead. Go ahead. You can go.
I promise. I think all I was going to say is this. Kamala Harris, former Attorney General of California Department of Justice, second largest Department of Justice in the United States, second only to United States Department of Justice. Our Department of Justice, I live in Cali, by the way, y'all. Our Department of Justice, our entire infrastructure as it pertains to laws, pertains to law enforcement, is paramilitary or quasi-military. The police forces here are known as paramilitary because it's such a large state. We could literally have our own country if we wanted to, arguably. Being the head of such a large entity with those so many different moving parts, in transnational gangs in the investigations and trafficking of drugs, of humans, that experience, that kind of resume makes her so well just molded for this role. That's all I wanted to say. Reese, go ahead and chime in. I apologize.
No, of course, you're fine. I do agree. People do forget that. California actually has the fifth largest economy in the entire world. So it's a major player. Obviously, she did a lot of great things in terms of her work with Mexico and in coalitions with other AGs. She led a group. What is it called? A convoy or an envoy? An envoy of several attorney generals to Mexico. They had to address the human trafficking that was happening and the drug trafficking and things like that. But I do want to piggyback off of Sydney's point, because one of the greatest threats to our national security we found is not military aggression. You guys notice we don't hear a whole lot about North Korea and their military exercises and all that stuff anymore. It's actually public health. And so just to underscore what Sydney said, that is so significant when we have a president in the White House who has moved to defund the World Health Organization, who does not listen to scientists, who believes that, who actually took out people from the CDC from these laboratories in China and things like that. And so what the significance of Kamala Harris's amendment that's going to be part of the NDAA is that she understands that our national security involves diplomacy, and our national security involves joint global health responses. We are going to be in a position where we're not going to be able to travel to Europe because the way that we have mishandled our health crisis here, the way that we mishandled coronavirus. Exactly. Mexico is shutting down its border to Americans. And so these, it's, yeah, and you've seen, I tweeted about it earlier. And so it's really significant that Senator Kamala Harris, one of the things that's really unique about her is that she doesn't just handle the moment right now. She looks at what is the lessons learned? How are we going to tackle this, prevent the next time this crisis happens? We're not going to do it by defunding the World Health Organization. We're going to do it by being a leader on the world stage. That's what the presidential envoy does. So that's really significant on that front. Another thing I want to point out is that speaking of aggression, I don't know if you guys remember when Donald Trump was talking about bombing religious monuments in Iran. So Senator Kamala Harris was part of the No War Against Iran Act, which was made sure that there were no funds that would go towards unauthorized military force in Iran. So she's not a war hawk by any means. Another thing that's important about her foreign policy experience and her worldview is her compassion and work for the refugee crisis. So Kamala Harris, if you listen to her, she's talked about the refugee crisis. There's a war refugee crisis where there's human rights abuses, there's civil war going on in places like Somalia and Syria, but there's also a forthcoming environmental crisis where we might have environmental refugees because of extreme weather and things like that. So she has all of these lenses, but she's actually encouraged and made resolutions towards extending the temporary protected status of TPS program for Somalia nationals and for Syria nationals. So, and she's talked about the triangle where you have the refugees from South America, remember the caravans and all that kinds of stuff. And so Charles is in the comments, he's saying stronger relations with Africa and India, with these two that the US can check China. Yes, so there are so many different things that we don't really talk about. And one last point I'll make about foreign policy. Senator Kamala Harris sits on the Senate Intelligence Committee, okay? And so they get weekly classified briefings. We know that y'all's president, the man in that White House, does not read his presidential daily briefings. At best, he doesn't read them. At worst, he reads them and still sides with Russia or our adversaries over our own intelligence communities. Well, Senator Kamala Harris, you guys may have read that article last year, I think it was in Vox, that talked about how she really shines on that Senate Intelligence Committee. She takes it seriously. She's a great interrogator. And she is probably, out of all, if you look at even, including Joe Biden, if you look at all of the people who are up for the candidacy of the vice president, she is the most abreast of what's happening in the world. She's the most informed in terms of the current situation on the ground, and has been for the past 3 years, because she's the only person under contention that sits on the Senate Intelligence Committee. So we cannot underscore that. The good thing about Kamala Harris, the exceptional thing about Kamala Harris, is that she is an informed decision maker. She's a deliberative person, and she has a lens that is going to be about governing out of common sense, out of empathy, and not out of white supremacy and not out of aggression. So that's what I wanted to say, to add on to what Maya and Sydney have said.
That's fantastic. You preached. Ready to take up collection. But no, listen. But no, that's it. I mean, she's just prepared and she has everything ready. She's smart. You know, the Senate Intelligence Committee. She's smart to make the moves she does. She just prepares herself. She's fantastic, which is why it's important for us to set the record straight. As a matter of fact, y'all, we're starting a new little segment in Live with KHive called Setting the Record Straight. As we know, we probably wouldn't have this panel if we didn't have to set the record straight. Just because everybody on this panel came to this panel because we had to spend time, energy, and effort setting the record straight on Kamala Harris's record. Obviously, Russian bots and attacking the criminal, you understand that. But also, they're actually very, very real people who are out spreading deliberately false information. Some of them are even in law. That's the crazy thing. They're like former paralegals or like former, I have seen a couple former public advocates or public defenders. But for the most part, still, well, not for the most part, for every part, still just spreading blatant lies. As a matter of fact, today, I think it was Anisha Gupta, I think it was, who published an article that in the New York Post, just lie after lie after lie after lie. So we're going to go ahead and get something just settled now, once for all. We're going to tackle the big one right here, Paul. This one's going to be truancy. Kamala Harris versus truancy. Shameless plug. I did a video on Twitter. Check that out. I got to put that out there. But in regard, the smear about Kamala Harris, or the consensus of the liars, is that Kamala Harris was hell bent on locking up poor Black mothers because their children either skipped school or locking up because their kids were sick and not able to go to school. This is an outright lie. Nothing can be further from the truth. As a matter of fact, in San Francisco, the thing that actually led to her truancy initiative was a spike in homicides, number one. What she discovered in the spike in homicides, worse than what they had in a couple of decades, was that 94%, when they did the research, 94% of the homicide victims were aged 25 years or younger. As a matter of fact, or excuse me, 94% of the homicide victims that are 25 years or younger were actually high school dropouts. So what she did was she looked at the root cause and said, okay, how are we having this issue? Turns out that truancy in San Francisco was not just an issue there. Obviously, it's an issue everywhere in California, but it was abnormally larger in San Francisco than the rest of the state. When I did my research, I found that out too as well. And so you were dealing with a city, a city that had as many as 2,400 elementary school children. We're talking about first, second, third, fourth grade missing 40, 60, 80 days of school. Middle school numbers, about maybe 500 or so middle schoolers were truant. Getting to high school, we're talking about somewhere around maybe 1,700 high schoolers being truant. That's an estimated number. I can't give you a specific person, but it's around that area. And so when you have that, and you have these also, notice the time of when this is taking place, while Kamala Harris district attorney, around those times, those children were born right out of the crack era. So they're still reeling, especially in San Francisco and Oakland, around in that area. And I was just using San Francisco, but that entire area was ravaged during the crack era. So when children come from that, there's a lot of disparity. They just go away. There's a lot of residual effects that they're dealing with. So what happened was you're seeing a spike in crime. And so one of the things that had to be done, Kamala said, you know what, I've got political capital, and spend some of it, meaning that, you know what, hey, people might not like the fact that we are going to start cracking down on the truancy, but people also can respect the fact that you got to get these kids off the street. You got to give them the education that they need. Otherwise, we're just preparing them for a life of either you're going to be either incarcerated before it's age 25 or dead. So you're going to be the perpetrator of a violent crime or the victim. So what she did was she created this initiative where it was not bent on locking people up. Now, prior to this, California back in the 70s had already criminalized truancy. So the myth that Kamala Harris criminalized truancy in California, straight up lie. That's not how it happened. It's already criminalized. But chronic truancy had not been actually definitively defined yet. Well, that's pretty redundant, but you get the idea. So in San Francisco, what she decided to do was identify children who were missing ridiculous numbers of days. Anything between 10 and 19 days missed unexcused is considered habitually truant. Chronic truancy was defined as anything past that, so 20 more. She sent out letters to every parent saying, hey, this is what we're doing. We're going to make sure your children's in school. If you need help, we're here for you. There's a phone number on there, 415-701-STAY. Access to resources, social services, assistance, and such. In more serious cases, she was able to actually have social services reach out directly. There's one case where a homeless woman was there holding down multiple jobs, had children having struggles. She needed help. Many other stories just like that. She also sent, her gang prosecutors and also her, her homicide prosecutors also sat in on meetings between the school administrators and parents, just to sit there and observe, just to understand that there's a real gravity here. The only thing that she ever really threatened anybody with was the prospect of your loving child not making it like out of high school possibly. or not making it past 25, which is actually a very, very scary thought. If you're a parent, anybody who has kids on this feed, I don't, but if you do, I know you understand that you love your children for anything. The last thing you want to do is see them die or be caught up in this very cyclical issue. And so the other thing that's interesting about this is that poverty overlaps this, because if you lack resources, you actually run into situations where you may not be able to get your children to school as much as they need to be. And that's the interesting thing about poverty. It's cyclical. It traps you in there. It's almost like it's designed to do that. Kamala Harris sees that and says, well, why don't we just take that particular part out, make sure that people actually have the resources and the help. It's uplifting. It's about the entire idea behind her truancy initiative is all about community involvement and social service assistance. That's what it's about. It's about, it takes a village to raise a child. It can't just be, hey, you figure it out, big deal. We got it, we got it done, you got it done. So long story short, the actual program is actually so successful. Matter of fact, number one, nobody was ever arrested in San Francisco. Like not nobody, like not a once. Pull that off in San Francisco. That's incredible by itself. If you've ever been to the Tenderloin, trust me, you know that's amazing. Two, the second part was that she got truancy to drop anywhere between 23%, got to 25% actually to fall down. Again, without locking anybody up. All it took was common sense and say, you know what, people need help. They don't need to be punished. They don't need punitive engagements. As far as any type of prosecute, yeah, there were some very serious cases, as a matter of fact, that they had to prosecute. But in prosecuting those cases, they didn't actually lock anyone up. What they were able to do was to say, listen, we have these services for you. Let's get this going there. And then once the actual programs or services were taken advantage of and improvements improved, then the DA's office in San Francisco was not prepared to look the other way. They actually did that. The system was so successful that the state of California looked at that as a model for a statewide issue of truancy. California just has that. Maybe due to large populations, a lot of different factors involved in that, but in any regard. This is where Bill SB 1317 comes in. It was actually presented by Mark Leno, who's a Democrat. I never got a chance to meet him yet, but very good things. Anyway, the actual bill, when it was actually presented, it was still Kamala's plan, but I think it was beat up a little bit on steroids, as a matter of fact, because statewide you have more access to resources. In any regard, the actual bill was presented, represented, amended, that sort of thing. The normal Senate, state Senate, legislators type stuff. Anyway, it ended up passing. This is 23 to 13, as a matter of fact. So this is overwhelming. As a matter of fact, like 18 Democrats said yes. In any regard, it gets sick. It signs the law by the Terminator, Governor Schwarzenegger, excuse me. Once it goes into effect, this is what the bill actually did. It did not, again, criminalize truancy statewide. It did mainly three things. Number one, this bill defined chronic truancy as 10% of the school year missed unexcused. So around about 18 days. Okay, we got 180 day school year, so 10% is about 18. Okay, so that's when chronic truancy is defined. The second thing that it did was it provided social services and resources. As a matter of fact, something called deferred judgment. As a matter of fact, it's actually called, I actually had it right there. It is called, I love how I said it so much. It's called deferred entry of judgment programs. That way to adjudicate the cases that involve the parents. So if your child is defined as chronically truant, the first thing that happens is it provides step-by-step a gauntlet of a bunch of different, gauntlet, however you want to pronounce it, of different services and assistance, whether it's reaching out from school administrators, whether it's local community, whether it's social services getting involved, different places of that matter. Anything to do that can help you to get involved before any type of law enforcement typically takes place. Now, in different districts of California, DAs have their discretion, depending on how many days. Typically in California, you're probably not going to hear from law enforcement based on probably around 40, 80 days, 40, 60, 80 days or so. So it takes a lot before law enforcement actually gets involved. But what the law does not do, it does not make it mandatory for you to be thrown in court or arrested or anything like that. All it does, it puts a cap on how much of punishment you can even get, because in California, previous to that, depending on what serious the situation is, the length of time or the amount of the fine can be really up to the judge at the time. But this law says that no more than a $2,000 fine and no more than up to 1 year in prison and or These are the maximum. This is only in the worst, most absolutely outrageous and extreme circumstances. This is not for regular moms struggling, trying to hold down jobs, just have situation, sick child. That's not what this is for. This is for the most egregiously outrageous situations, because those exist as well. The other thing that it does, again, with those gauntlets, it provided a bunch of things as far as meetings with school district representatives, the service referrals that it also allows you to do to adjudicate and defer the entry of judgment so you could avoid any type of penalty at all. It allows you to case management, mental and physical health services, parent classes and support, substance abuse, child care and housing, and a bunch of other things. It's not even limited to that. Pretty much everything offered to you except, I don't know, people from the DA's office or people from the AG's office actually going to class for your child. That's literally where they stop short of it. But the entire idea behind this entire thing was to make sure that children are back in school, to get them out of the criminal justice system, get them out of the grave, and make sure that we have a greater, really a greater percentage of public safety. The actual link is between public education, public safety. She was able to draw that link. That's what that was about. Nobody anywhere was excited, looking forward to, trying with any regard to lock up parents for their kids missing school. That is a LIE on guard. And we'll leave it at that. And that's clearing up. Well, we're going to use that word. But that's really what it is. So that's setting the record straight on Kamala Harris's truancy policy. He said,
Okay.
Drew, I just wanted you to know, Kenny texted me. He was like, Drew has gone over his 10 minutes. So let him know that.
Kenny, let him go. Let him do his thing.
The only reason I did that is because I just did the video, and I'm dropping the remix right after this is done. So it's fresh in my head, and this is into my fan. We're going to go into anyway.
I want everybody to know, Kenny said that he is going to be back next week for everybody that misses him. He said he's going to be live next week. He had to take a day off today, so he's getting his vacation for 4th of July.
Nice. Well, I want to add real quick to what Drew said. One of the things, since we're correcting the record, one of the problems with the record was that media didn't understand how to cover her policies. I know we've touched on that before, but they never really questioned why would she decide to implement this type of policy. And so they weren't looking at or didn't care. They're kind of like, I don't really care if Black kids end up disproportionately going to jail. They didn't care. So when people are looking at these stories and wondering why she was criticized so harshly, some of that massive fault was really on the media, not caring to tell the full story, not caring to decipher it. Instead, they decided to quote Laura Bazelon over and over and over and over and over again, instead of saying, well, let's look at the numbers here. In 2000, Black people were going to jail 15 times more than white people for similar drug offenses. And Kamala Harris made the connection that, one, that was already systemic racism and oppression that was going into that, and two, that it had to do with low education, is lack of education, just like white kids were, except that Black kids were going into jail more for it. So she was making that connection. The media could have easily deciphered that. They could have said, oh, this is probably why she proposed this problem. The fact that they thought that people were getting thrown into jail with that is complete negligence. And I just saw Drew today even having to dismiss. I saw you, Drew, very well dismiss somebody point by point by point. That was wonderful. And I will also say too, I won't say correcting the record, but there was, if I can mention really fast, I'm sure all of you saw the Slate tweet this week. It was really gross. It was like a really gross tweet. It was kind of like, well, the vice president doesn't really matter, so Kamala Harris is fine then. I was kind of like, what? Who? Maybe this is a new reporter. Oh, it's the director of their news at Slate wrote that? So it was insane. And
Girl.
it was disgusting. And so all of us went to correct the record on that. First, I wanted to correct the record because what I was embarrassed about for that woman at Slate is that she doesn't obviously know what the vice president does and hasn't any idea of how the vice president's role has changed over the last 40 50 years.
What?
She would have been
Okay.
correct. I said on
Go
Twitter,
on.
you would have been correct if you wrote that in 1935. You're right. In 1935, the vice president really didn't do much, and everyone was really angry about it. But it did change, and the vice president started defining their role with the president at the time. They're more now in the executive branch than they are in the legislative aspect of being more with the Senate. So if Kamala Harris becomes vice president, the vice president is going to have the opportunity not only to have the most face time ever with the president, but they're also going to have massive influence on every aspect of policy. Someone said today to me, well, she wouldn't be able to shape anything. How the fuck do you know? Because there's only two things that are defined in the Constitution as to what the vice president does. That's the formal aspect. The informal part is still being explored. We saw that Dick Cheney went, I'm going to take over all of foreign policy. Right? That was wrong. That was an abuse of power. But we're saying in the right hand, someone like Kamala Harris could really wield something really fantastic right now and be incredibly influential. So that was some of the record that I had to correct this week on Slate. And I still don't think that woman had a response. Did anyone see if that woman came back to Twitter to see?
She deleted the tweet. Matter of fact, she said it doesn't matter anyway. Oh, that thing got deleted. It said tweet's not loading. I was like, oh man.
She needs to apologize though. And I think that's the last thing I'll say about that. They need to apologize because the thing is, they think because they delete the tweet, they didn't say something misogynoir, racist, sexist. They need to recognize what they're doing. And the fact that they thought that was just fine to say something like that, it didn't even occur. That's the worrisome part. It didn't even occur to her. She sent the tweet and thought it was fine. And she thought no one would care. And that's more of the damaging part that I continuously worry about, that this is what we're going to still see. Now, people have said to me, well, what happens if Kamala Harris is picked and that's going to keep happening? I'm like, yeah, it doesn't matter. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't have Kamala Harris. That means we need to have someone like that so we can start rooting all of this out and getting it out of the system and recognizing that we need more inclusion in media to be able to cover these things properly.
Reese, did you want to say?
Yeah, I think people are very much unaccustomed to a Black woman having a fierce devotion from very vocal and receipts-driven fans, and they are finding out each time, don't come for Kamala unless we send for you, and you do not want the KHive buzzing, okay? So I think that I want to applaud everybody who is successful in calling out the misogynoir, the ridiculous double standards, the misstatements. We cannot let up. This is still a crucial time. And please use the resources that we give you guys. Please use your own resources. Keep your foot on the gas because this stuff is important. And we are training them up for how they need to be diligent and care when they speak about a Black woman, because they do not speak about white men in this way, and to a lesser extent, but still more deference is shown to white women. But when it comes to a Black woman, we've seen very much carelessness and callousness and cynicism towards Kamala Harris. And it's not unique to Kamala. She's just the person who got out there right now. But if there will be another Black woman who will be subjected to this abuse and this disrespect. And so that's why it's important to let them know every single time. Don't let up, not even one time, on these folks.
That's it. I mean,
yeah, shout out to the KHive, man. Y'all have been really holding it down. I've noticed that, like any misinformation that comes on the timeline, you guys are jumping in on it. So continue to do that. It's going to get worse, especially if she is the pick. If she is, VP, we're gonna be working overtime because the disinformation machine is going to get worse.
That's right. Well, I mean, at the end of the day, like I said, I mean, it's the second most powerful. I would want to say one thing. Slate did put up a half-assed apology tweet, like a little bit after that, just saying it did not convey the idea that we wanted it to be about. We apologize. It wasn't like an actual sincere apology. But no, that's not gonna cut it. They need to do more. But in any regard, like I said, we need Kamala in the House. Not in the House, in Congress, I'm talking about in the White House, in the Oval Office, doing that in the House. Speaking of in the House, domestic violence. That's not a good segment. But listen, what we are, since we are still in quarantine. Matter of fact, in California, it's got ramped up again. Domestic violence is a big issue. People spend a lot more time together. A lot more opportunity for something to go wrong. Reese, I know you wanted to speak a little bit on that and where we are right now.
Yeah. So, the thing about being locked down, quarantined, social distancing is you don't get a break from those people in your house. And there are people who were already in abusive situations, and there's, school or work was a reprieve from that. And it struck me when Kamala Harris actually brought this up earlier on in the pandemic, talking about what keeps her up at night are things like children in these abusive situations, in addition to children who don't have broadband and things like that. But Kamala Harris has always been a woman of action, not just rhetoric, of receipts, not just words. And so I did want to highlight some of her deeds, and also point out that this is not new to her. As you all know, Senator Kamala Harris got her start in Alameda County as a deputy district attorney. She was prosecuting these sorts of cases, focusing primarily on sexual abuse, particularly of child sexual assault. So this is something that she has really been deeply invested in. When she was district attorney, her office through Kamala's initiatives really increased their victim services, which, it involved, making sure not just limited to domestic violence, but that there was crisis intervention, access to grief and trauma counseling, emergency shelter, court accompaniment, and things of that nature. So we're talking going back decades now. But most recently, I just want to highlight some of the things that she's been doing, and she's done it along with her colleagues. But again, this has really been Kamala Harris's long-standing focus. Early on in this pandemic in March, Kamala Harris urged the administration to help victims and survivors of domestic violence during the coronavirus pandemic. And so what she wanted was she expected that there was going to be an increase in the need for the services. She talked about this in interviews, and they, wrote a letter expressing concern about the well-being of families who faced an increase of risk of domestic violence during the outbreak, and urged the administration to ensure that service providers had flexibility and resources to help victims and survivors of domestic violence. And we have seen, there's been reporting, like for instance in Chicago, how the number of calls skyrocketed. In other cities, there's not national data on this, but there have been, reports on this. So that's one. That was in March. In May, again, she called for protection of domestic violence victims. And so what that was, it was actually a specific request for family justice centers. And those family justice centers function to support domestic violence and abuse survivors. And there's been, they point out, of course, there's been an increase of domestic violence across the nation. Sorry. I accidentally made a full screen and got rid of my notes. But anyways, so that was something that they introduced. Again, they have to keep the drumbeat of pressure on the administration, because they don't give a damn about anybody, okay, at all. And so that kind of oversight and that pressure really matters. Also, she along with her colleagues urged Congress to provide housing support for domestic violence survivors, so that in future legislation, it would address the pandemic to make sure that there are resources to meet domestic and sexual violence survivors' urgent housing needs, which have been exacerbated by the stay-at-home orders, social distancing, and ongoing economic upheaval. But one thing I wanted to point out is that another thing, this is prior to the pandemic, in 2019, June 2019, Kamala Harris introduced legislation to expand legal representation for victims of violence. And so this is, again, where Senator Kamala Harris's experience as an executive, let's be clear, that's what a district attorney is. A district attorney is an executive, an attorney general is an executive, but as a prosecutor as well, and understanding the kinds of needs that victims of domestic violence, sexual assault need when they are going through a case or when they're trying to get out of a bad situation. So she introduced the Ensuring Representation for Survivors Act. And that was legislation to ensure that all survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault have access to a lawyer if they need it. So we know that you are guaranteed counsel, you're guaranteed a public defender. But what this says is that if you're a victim, then you also get representation. Because studies have shown that when abused victims are represented by an attorney, their ability to break out of the cycle of violence increases dramatically. And so, again, this all goes back to the lens in which Kamala Harris has governed, which she's legislated, which she has, has been an executive, and who her target is. A lot of people, Drew talked about this earlier. The misconception, the lie, the smear is that Senator Kamala Harris is all about locking people up. No, she's about getting justice, and getting justice doesn't necessarily is not limited to getting a conviction. It's also means making sure that the cycle of abuse is broken, and regardless of what happens in the court case, that these people, whether a sexual assault victim, a domestic violence victim, a victim, a child abuse victim, that they have the resources that they need to get out of that situation. So a lot of people don't know that about her record, but I think that's something worth talking about. And if you are in a situation like that, there are resources out there. There are hotlines for you to call. And if you know somebody who's in a situation, please help them get help. I know that many of us, I know in my family, I have experience, not me personally, but I'm very close to people who have been the victims of domestic violence. It's not a good situation. And again, to my point, to reiterate my point, it's not just about getting a conviction, because everybody doesn't want to call the police. Everybody doesn't want to go through a court case, but those folks still need resources to get out of those situations. And so Senator Kamala Harris, if she's on that ticket and if she's in that White House, then victims, and specifically domestic violence and child abuse victims and sexual assault victims, will have a strong advocate. As Attorney General, she eliminated the rape kit backlog. So she has always had an eye towards really providing victim services.
She does. One thing, I think when she had like over 1,200 domestic violence abuses convicted, as a matter of fact, 1,200, that's a lot. That's the thousands of people it must be talking about. Domestic violence, well, shoot. More power to them.
Right, hello.
Keep your hands off folks. Shoot. In any regard, I don't know if anybody else wanted to touch on that in the panel before we move on. I know I speak to this person. I know my mother, she's a domestic violence survivor. Before she met my dad, this is not my father, I just want to clear that up. But prior to that, yeah, she was when she was in her early 20s in her first marriage, to the point where my mother is this awesome, wonderful, positive lady on fire for the Lord, all that. But she was telling me at that point in life where she was actually contemplating either murder or suicide. And this is thinking, so to know that my mother was in a situation like that where she was pushed to that edge. Now, granted, she didn't know the Lord back then, but anyway, it doesn't matter. The fact that her temperament was pushed to that level where she was contemplating either killing this man or killing herself. And the only thing that stopped her from killing herself was that it would break her mother's heart. What stopped her from killing him is that she would go to prison. She was like, I don't know. And then on top of that, the resources back then, this is late 70s or what have you. So they weren't available like they were now. You couldn't just go and say that because they don't take those things seriously, especially not back then. Thank God it's been ramped up now. So that's a personal connection. That's crazy. It's crazy. So my heart was at anybody in situations. Please call the hotline. Matter of fact, I posted on Twitter. I'll get the number. I'll post the domestic violence hotline. We should post it. And salute to your mom. That is just absolutely incredible courage that it took for her to get out of that situation. I do want to go to a comment though that Mark left. He said Kamala also started a domestic violence stalking unit because of the Femi Ode connection between stalking and domestic violence. I was not aware of that. So I said, hey, Mark, can you DM that to me? I'm going to add that to the credentials criminal justice file because that absolutely needs to be in there. And one other point too is there's a huge connection between domestic partner violence and homicide. Most women that are a victim of homicide, it's because it's from a domestic partner. And so literally getting people out of these abusive situations can save lives. Well, thank you for that. I didn't know that either. That stuff's pretty dope, though. Man, she awesome, man. Every time you learn something new, you be like, yeah, this is crazy. Saying she didn't shoot. Anyway, I probably it's hard to hold your composure when you learn about Kamala Harris, man. She's crossing the T's, dotting the I's, and slashing the X's and all of that. But in the regard, let's move on.
And wait, but to your point, and that's why I think we take it so personal. A lot of people don't understand why we go so hard for Kamala. It's because when you see something that just is so completely just a complete distortion, it's like unrecognizable, the person that they're talking about, we can't help but go hard for a person who has for decades gone hard for every single marginalized demographic. So she made sure that people, she says this, you should never be made to fight alone. And that's what we do. We make sure that she does not feel like she's made to fight alone, because she doesn't have allies in the media that will correct the record. She doesn't have the pundit class in her back pocket. She's still a Black woman who has all the systemic barriers that she has to break through. But what she has is the KHive and Team Kamala and Kamala supporters to make sure that we are going to correct the record. And whether you like her or not, you're not going to be able to lie on her.
That's why we do it. That's exactly why we do it. And moving to the other portion of it, especially with the media, but we also get hype when we see positive coverage of her in the media, and we actually can tell that the journalists or, where the editorial board, whomever, did their actual research and looked at things and can see the bigger picture and see that. Matter of fact, USA Today, the Black woman for VP enthusiasm, I know they recently had that, so which is exciting. We were going to have our brother Kenny cover that, but we have him here in spirit. But Reese, since you're here in person, could you tell us about that as well?
Yes. I have a mantra: don't live by the polls and don't die by the polls. But damn it, when you have good polling, you might as well go ahead and share it. And so I want to talk about this USA Today polling because it's universally good news for Kamala Harris. And I really hope that the Biden campaign is taking heed to what this is saying. Now, to be clear, it says that 72% of Democrats in USA Today poll say it's important for Biden to pick a woman of color. Okay. Now, woman of color is not the same as saying Black woman. But I would caution the Joe Biden campaign to interpret that as saying a woman of color, but not necessarily a Black woman, will do. Because when you look at the data, you will see that the person that generates the most enthusiasm is Kamala Harris. The second person that generates the most enthusiasm is Stacey Abrams, who's also a Black woman. And so regardless of how the question is worded, it's clear that people want a woman of color on the ticket. But again, don't think you're going to try to split the difference and say, I'm not going to get a white woman and I'm not going to get a Black woman. Do not do that. Do not play these games. Do not pull our punt card. Okay? That's free campaign advice. I'm sure a lot of white men will charge you a lot of information to present that via polling data. But I'm telling you this for free. Okay? So let's move on to actually what it's saying. 7 to 10 Democrats say it's important that the presumptive nominee, Joe Biden picks a woman of color as his running mate. Now, I don't know if you guys might recall, but the New York Times released this article and they blasted it to say that people don't care or people don't believe that Joe Biden should pick a woman of color. That's not what the polling asked. The polling asked, should race be a factor in Joe Biden's decision? A lot of people will say, well, no, you shouldn't. It shouldn't be. You shouldn't pick somebody because they're Black. But that's not the same as saying as what's important to me. And so that's where they gaslighted people. They tried to make it seem like people saying that Joe Biden shouldn't necessarily consider race as the same thing as saying that they don't consider race, because it's clear, all the polling has been consistent that people do get more excited, they're more enthusiastic, and they believe that the person that's picked should be a woman of color. Now, free advice, that means a Black woman. So, and as it says here, the potential, this is a USA Today article. Matter of fact, let me go on ahead and I'll post it in here. Let me know if y'all see this. It says here, I'm just going to read a couple of things. 75% of white Americans said it was very or somewhat important to them. 60% of Black Americans took that view. Black people, we got to catch up to the white people. It's okay. They're telling us it's okay to have a woman of color on the ticket, so we could be okay with it too. And 81% of Hispanics. That's a big number. Speaking of Hispanics, now I know it's Hispanics, Latino, you know, different people use different terminology, but I'm going to use the terminology that's in this polling. But Kamala Harris actually, unprompted, secured the endorsement of one of the largest Spanish-speaking newspapers in this country, the La Opinion. Maya, do you want to talk about that?
La Opinion is La Opinion. The Opinion is one of the largest Spanish-speaking in the country, and it's huge for her to have gotten that. Yeah, I saw earlier this week, it said, and I got a quote here from Adrian who covered it, said it praises Harris for introducing Coronavirus Immigrant Family Protection Act that would give treatment to families regardless, get this back, regardless of immigration status, and calls her a leader on police reform, calling to ban chokeholds and establish national use of force guidelines. So it's massive to have gotten that endorsement of the few that are still in the running for VP. To me, honestly, like, that's a lock. To me, this is an opinion that is, it's like in the top 3 of the most read Latinx papers across the United States. It still has a loyal base. So to me, I'm just like, it's over, it's done, it's picked, she's picked. Because this is going to be, 2020 will be probably the most ever that Latinos, Latinx, Hispanic, that has the difference between South America, Latin America, and Mexico. That's the difference is really Spain was is Spanish. All of us are probably with Latinx, by the way. I'm gonna speak for half my people. It's okay. There's nothing wrong. You can still say Latino in some South American countries. They still use the masculine verb. If you say Latinx, that's cool. That's because this is an expansion. The language is growing. It's trying to be gender neutral. If you say Hispanics, there's nothing wrong with that either. So I'll let you all know that's all fine. But to me, to secure this right now, when this is going to be potentially one of the biggest voting blocks in 2020, is really massive. So yeah, I mean, to me, I was like, it's done when I saw that a couple days ago. Hopefully Joe Biden recognizes that too.
I want to be honest with you, Maya. I'm excited about that because, you know, historically, you know, Democrats don't get the message to, you know, the Hispanic voters. They tend to lean, you know, further red. But there is a lot of that, you know, subset of that voting bloc that has not been touched yet, really. That's kind of like, you know, they're kind of purple. So I'm really excited to see where the Democrats go with that. I think the future is, you know, of the Democratic Party is Black, but also brown as well. And there's a lot of untapped potential in that voting bloc. So I'm really excited to see what's going to happen there.
I'll say too, just like Black communities and Hispanic communities and Latinx communities, something that a lot of, they call them this leftist white voters, they call themselves that, right? Progressives. What they forget is there is religious blocks in Black communities and Latinx communities. There's an aspect of family and conservatism. Some that see incrementalism and not as a mark of they don't believe in progress. We just know how this country works. And so that is why I think that the people that are like, we need progress and we need it now, while they're ignoring some of the struggles that these families and these different communities have gone through, or they're ignoring these things that are culturally a part of our lives. So to me, someone might see, well, that's not a big deal that paper likes it. No, you have to understand this is a telltale sign that people are paying attention, and that they are that they've always been paying attention, but that they are saying we know who sees us right now. And I think that's where, when the kind of, I'm going to say Warren Niece, I'm not trying to trash like Elizabeth Warren, but the people that have been really standing Warren really hard this week, I've been trying to have normal conversations with them. It's been tough. And I'm saying, you're kind of really, really still ignoring blocks of people that will be seen. They are not going to be seen by some of Elizabeth Warren's policies or her priorities, or they haven't been seen. Let's be honest. I haven't seen that present in her policy, and Kamala Harris has. And we're seeing that Latinx communities and different sects of Black communities are saying, well, Kamala Harris is seeing us. That's massive. And I think that's why people are desperate. People should know that with all the protests and everything that's been going on, that all of us are desperate that our representatives see us in all of our multitudes and all of our different various backgrounds. So yeah, I was thrilled to see that this week. Yeah, and I hope to see more of it. I think now some other papers are going to start getting off the sidelines as well and making endorsements this coming week too. I mean, you saw the Boston didn't put the other way. I think they said don't pick Elizabeth Warren.
Oh, the Boston Herald. Yeah, the Boston Herald has been on her case bad.
I was like, oh goodness. I mean,
it's
wow,
not good when your hometown paper hates you.
So no, the Boston Herald been eating folks alive. I'm not gonna, we ain't gonna say no names of child.
I'm not gonna say that. Yeah, I'm just like, yeah.
Ghetto. I was like, oh,
that's all I'll say about it. But
she got the basic treatment.
Yeah.
But what I do think is notable though is, again, it goes back to decades of receipts. And Senator Kamala Harris has the receipts. It's not, it's one thing to run and you make strategic hires to appear to be allied with the community, which you also conveniently fire as soon as that campaign is over and they don't serve that strategic purpose appearance-wise anymore. But Senator Kamala Harris has really put in the work in terms of with DACA, in terms of with refugees, in terms of with unaccompanied minors, even in California when she was Attorney General, raising millions of dollars so that unaccompanied minors had representation. And she wrote an amicus brief so that as versus Loretta Lynch. Versus the Obama administration, so that unaccompanied minors were guaranteed legal counsel. And so those are some of the things. She held immigration fairs, legal fairs when she was district attorney, so that people who would understand that their immigration status would not be taken into account when it came to reporting crimes. That's documented. She has done so many things. And one of the things that I really respect the most about her allyship is that it's never come at the expense of another community. Some people feel like, well, I got to pick a side. And Kamala Harris knows that it's no side picking. Every demographic, every community needs to be seen at all times. And every community, their needs are worthy of being met. And it's not just, and be clear, immigration is not just a Latinx issue. It's an African issue. We talked about earlier the Somali refugees. Also, there's the Haiti refugees. It's also it's a lot of things. DACA is not just a Latinx thing. It's an Asian issue. Kamala Harris has South Asian roots, so she definitely has the receipts across the board. But so I thought it was very meaningful that she got this endorsement, because it's not just an endorsement about who came over for tea, who had the most personal relationship with the writer. It's an endorsement that was based in receipts and a record of decades of showing up before she was sent for. Drew, did you have something? Because I'm going to read off a couple more things from this USA Today article.
Man, I was just going to say she's awesome, but go ahead, my bad. I just be thinking, like, it's crazy. She do all this stuff, man. I have trouble with, like, responding to emails. She can do all this, man. So I'm like,
I know. It's so true. And I think that, a lot of people wouldn't think that if you're a Black woman, that you're going to be an ally. I mean, just that a lot of people are very narrow-minded, right? They think, okay, well, she's Black, so she's not going to do anything for the Latinx community. She's Black, she's not going to do anything for the AAPI community. She's not going to do anything for the Native American community. And she's not going to do anything for the Black community. There are Black people who believe that Kamala Harris is not going to do anything for the Black community, even though she has articulated so many different policies and advocated for so many different policies. Let's be clear, Kamala Harris actually secured a 14% increase in HBCU funding. There are people who've been in Senate who did not do that. Okay, and so she's the one who introduced the first Black maternal health mortality bill, and she didn't just go and dump some shit onto a PDF. She actually consulted with the Black Moms Matter, which is a Black organization, for months in crafting a meticulous policy that was actually based in evidence, which was a successful North Carolina doula program. A lot of Black people, one of my friends, I don't know if Portia is still on, but she had a doula. Another one of my friends just recently had a baby. She also had a doula. A lot of Black women in particular are moving towards doulas and midwives and slightly alternative medicine. And so I think it's so interesting that her Maternal Care Act actually had grant funding for that sort of program, because understanding that there's institutional racism and biases that are causing Black women to lose their lives, and a doula program and prenatal health care, those are the kinds of things that actually save lives. And that North Carolina program, by the way, was actually successful at eliminating the mortality disparity between Black women and white women. It didn't entirely eliminate the Black maternal mortality, but it did at least eliminate that disparity. But just to wrap this up, just the one thing I did want to point out, somebody said Reese hates PDFs. I listen, I don't have a problem with PDFs, but I'm just saying anybody can make a PDF. Yeah, I can go right now and I can click print to Adobe PDF. That don't mean that I'm an ally. That don't mean that I have any kind of receipts. I just print it, click print, PDF, and that's it. Anybody can do that. But I appreciate that comment. But I just want to read this one last thing from this USA Today article, which says that Harris, the daughter of Jamaican and Indian immigrants, generated the most excitement across racial lines. 41% of whites, I don't like to say whites and Blacks, stuff like that, but that's what it says. I'm just reading off the article. 41% of whites, 32% of African Americans said they would be excited by her choice. That was the most of any group. Overall, an additional 33% called her acceptable. 12% said not acceptable. And just for contrast, Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren, who was white, was seen as exciting by 33%. That's 8% low, or was it? That's 8, right? 8% lower than Kamala Harris. 15% of Black respondents, which is less than half of what Kamala Harris had, which is 32% of African Americans. A lot of people that said they're equal. That's not what the data says. And overall, 38% said she would be acceptable, but 19% called her not acceptable, the highest negative rating of any of the 11 names of the poll rundown. Not my words, this is what USA Today has published. And so there wasn't any kind of data about women of color that weren't Black women. But before I get off the stage, Charles Cobb says they need to stop it with the Tammy Duckworth BS. Listen, I'm just saying that don't be tempted, Joe Biden and company.
Because we know y'all watching. We know y'all in here.
Don't think you're gonna split the difference. Not pick white, not pick Black. Don't do it. This moment of racial reckoning and Black Lives Matter is about saying that Black lives matter, that Black people need to have a seat at the table, the seat that we've earned, by the way, through loyalty and through credentials. And so I just want to emphasize that once again. And we've outlined for 12 weeks now why this is really a no-brainer from every single level. And I don't know of anybody else that's doing this for any other candidates. I don't know anybody who's doing that for any other candidates. But at any rate, just one last thing. I know we're about to go to the closing, I'm sure, but Jennifer James said Don Jr.'s girlfriend has tested positive for COVID-19. I know that don't have nothing to do with Kamala Harris, but child, that is crazy. And somebody said, who is Tammy? Governor? No,
You
Tammy is
play
a U.S.
stupid
senator.
games, you get stupid prizes.
Yeah.
I don't wish it on anybody. I don't
No,
wish
of
it on
course
anybody.
not.
But
Of course, no.
But at the same time, I cannot stand how much obviously they politicized it to a point where some people are still too afraid to put on a mask now without feeling that they're going to be having some retribution. You know,
Yeah,
so I'm
yeah.
I'm hoping that changes.
I think
Wow,
that I think that
Wow.
the Trump rally was an experiment in fake news, right? Is it really fake news? And I think that the evidence is becoming abundantly clear that coronavirus is not fake news. Okay. When you get a bunch of people in a stadium that are not wearing masks, that are not social distancing, you're going to have people in large numbers get infected. So tomorrow's 4th of July, please stay safe, folks. Please stay safe.
Y'all.
And think about the potential impact of whatever it is that you're doing, and if you are risking coronavirus, because it's really serious out here.
Serious. No radio is serious. Take me with you. Hit me with you. All right. Don't leave me. Anyway, that is a matter of fact. I love that trend, by the way. I know it's a fad. It's cool, but that's hilarious. After every little corny dad joke. If you have dad jokes, let them fly. This is the season of dad jokes. Just follow it up with "Take me with you. Take me with you. Don't leave me. Don't leave me." That is another episode of Live with the KHive. And oh boy, did we give y'all something for real, for real. That was a show right there. I feel inspired. I'm empowered. I'm feeling great. But anyway, we're gonna see y'all next week. I am your host, Drew Comments. Chilling here with Sydney A at the underscore. Matter of fact, at the underscore the Sydney A, because she had to change it. I got used to your last name, bro. I apologize.
I'm sorry, y'all.
My Travis, as always. And Black Women Views, Reese Colbert in here. You know what I'm saying? My dad. And we for that, we're gonna go ahead and skedaddle and be out. I'll let you.